That should be good. And we are live. So I'll probably wait a few minutes. For today's lunchtime, we actually have 2 live lunchtime sessions. We have one with myself and one with Kenny. This one is going to be a mostly like DevSecOps, more general industry roundtable. I know that even that term can be controversial to some degree, and so I'm excited to talk about that. And the other panel, which will also be recorded, will be Teleport's tips and tricks. So my name is Ben Arent. I'm a developer relations here at Teleport. And, I helped get many of these speakers. And so it's great to sort of catch up. It was in November of last year. So while it was 2022, it feels like there was the holiday period. And now we're sort of back, reliving it. And so we get to catch up again. So I guess I'll go around to my right. Kevin, do you want to give a quick intro and tell people where you work?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Kevin Hannaford. I work I lead security engineering at Discord. If you were on here early enough, I also did a talk earlier about building the Department of Yes.
All right, Josh, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name is Josh Wieder. I work for a company called Buyer's Edge Platform, and I'm a senior engineer supporting a team of about 800 developers.
Great, and Sako?
Hey, I'm Sako. I'm working at a company called Gladly, customer care platform, and my role is DevOps/security.
Okay, to start things off, I have an easy one. This one is going to be around sort of what keeps you up at night. What are the things that go bump that you worry that the page is going to go off?
Oh boy. I think the easy answer is the unknown unknowns. That's like the manager answer, I guess. To be a little bit more specific than that, at least what's relevant directly to Discord is we leverage external sort of contractors, BPOs, if you will, for multi-language customer support. It's a very different environment, right? They're not full FTEs. They don't work in our office. They're in a bunch of countries all over the world, including places like Ukraine, actually. And there's like Lapsus right now, which is and a couple of other threat actor groups that are actively targeting BPOs. So that's probably the thing that's been keeping me up at night lately is what can we do to make sure that the folks that are not, here in the San Francisco office or working directly on the platform, on the product, can achieve sort of the same profile of security as everybody else. That's the theme right now for me.
Okay, and what about yourself, Josh?
Oh, well, I think there's a combination of two things. One is just all the sort of legacy tech debt that kind of comes from being a part of a acquisition-heavy company like Buyer's Edge Platform. We still have a lot of work to do in terms of modernizing infrastructure from companies that we purchase. But just more generally, I was reading recently about one of these sort of criminal online clearinghouses and how there was some dissension in the ranks because the management of the website had come out formally in support of Vladimir Putin. And one of the things that's kind of scary is just this increasing relationship between criminal IT networks and nation states, and just an increasing level of professionalization among groups like that.
Yeah, I guess that's a kind of interesting other segue from Kevin's to some degree. I guess some of them can also be like possible insider threats, but unknowingly, they may just like share one password or do something, and it can escalate pretty quickly.
Yeah.
You want to go, Kevin?
Just to add to that, I mean, +1 to like the increasing level of professionalism of some of these threat actor groups. Like it kind of used to be just people who wanted to cause harm or damage. And now we're seeing a lot of like organization of many people of that mindset, and the organization of those groups makes things quite a bit more challenging.
Mm-hmm. And Sako, you want to go last?
Sure. I would say it's a combination of scale, reliability, and security. And while we are doing that, how to make sure do enough experiments to realize risks early, identify the risk early, and kind of lower that risk. Meanwhile, keep the cost within the range and not over-engineer when it comes to quality and in terms of, in general, playbooks and all this process around that. And meanwhile, making sure we are delivering enough business value to our customers while doing all this engineering. That's tough, but yeah, that's what I would say exciting.
And when you talk about cost, are you talking about sort of cost of sort of monitoring and reporting? Is it infrastructure cost? Is it just cost of engineers' times? Where are you seeing that?
I would say it's a mix of both engineering and then while you are picking the tool and make sure you're not over provisioning or the reliability wise and scalability wise, it's setting you in the right path that you don't need to after some time go back and redo. That I would say infrastructure cost plus engineering.
Yeah, and I think actually, I think Kevin brought this up in his keynote around like DDoS at Discord, that it's sort of a continuous thing that you sort of, to some degree, you almost like automate away the problem. That it isn't, you can like focus on other tasks as sort of a team because there's always like a million and one things to work on. And so
a million and one is a small number.
What are some like key initiatives that you're currently working on?
Wow. A million and one key initiatives. There's a bunch. One of the things I think that is like thematically important for us this year is getting access management into a significantly better place, than we ended the year last year in. In 2021, we brought in Okta and kind of did the whole role-based access controls thing that a lot of other people have done, and so that made big strides there. Wasn't everyone had access to everything anymore, and we added teleport, so that helped us for like production stuff. And then so coming into 2023, the thought is like, well, how do we make that better? How do we, delegate more of this? How do we remove more of the confused deputies from the process? How do we get sort of mature, the compliance aspects of that, like doing user access reviews in, periodic different periods of time, those kinds of things. Like thematically, up-leveling access management for us is a big key initiative. And I swear I won't talk about teleport too much, but teleport's a huge part of that. Like we are actually leaning quite a bit on like the flow that teleport already has and trying to expand that to like other things, Google Groups and Okta Groups and whatnot, because like access requests and some of how that works and just the time-bound permissions and things like that is a noble goal. Teleport's there. We're kind of catching up in other parts of the business.
Yeah. And Josh, what about yourself?
Well, Kevin touched on observability, and that's a big goal for us this year. And just like Kevin described, Teleport's playing a big role of that process for us. Observability, both in terms of allowing us to see more of what our developers are up to across the scope of our infrastructure, but also limiting observability in some respects also, right? Like making sure that our GitHub organizations are managed appropriately and that we can fully deboard employees once they leave. It's a complicated project and it's an ongoing battle for us.
Yeah, and what do you have a central identity provider like Kevin uses Okta, we use Okta too?
We use Azure AD for that role right now. So there's we're bringing in Vault to handle some of the aspects that Teleport doesn't necessarily handle as effectively, the sort of more complex application authentication stuff that we need to handle. So, yeah.
Yeah, the onboarding and offboarding of people is a common task. I think towards the end we saw like the Great Resignation, and then we've seen workforces be reduced very quickly. I'm sure there's many Twitter engineers who probably have some form of access to systems at this point that they haven't disclosed yet.
Sure.
Sako, do you want to go over what initiatives you're currently working on?
Yeah, I would say we have quite a bit of stuff going around the compliance, and Teleport is doing amazing role in that front. And access request is one of the features we are also trying more bring adoption, more least privileged access to make sure all the teams that have the right access. And it's not always they have access, like more time boxed whenever they need. And so process around that, this is key area to identify, make sure that it will not slow down developer productivity. At the same time, it will create enough value and security.
Yeah, that kind of seems like a theme, and I think that was my next kind of question, was around like providing hands-on access to building tools. But I think if we talk more about like access requests, I think for all three of you, like, what's your sort of philosophy on how much access do you give, and how do you think about like time bounding that access?
That's a hard question. To be honest, I wish nobody had access to anything. It'd make my job a lot easier, but that's not reality. And one of the things like at Discord that we do is we lean quite heavily on like individual team autonomy. And so a lot of people need a lot of different access. It changes quite frequently and kind of depending on what they're working on. So we don't have like a lot of standing access or a lot of really broad access. We've done a lot of work over the last couple of years to kind of pull in, least privileged principles and make sure that people don't have pervasive access they don't need and that kind of stuff. But it kind of depends on it kind of depends on the situation. Like there's a lot of times where I will say, yeah, you can have direct access to production, right? That's why we bring in something like Teleport so that people can do that. They can troubleshoot things on box, live when we're in the middle of an incident, that kind of stuff. And then there's other types of situations where it's like, you don't need to be on a box in production to see logs. So let's build something or bring something in to obfuscate that so that you spend less time in production, but still get the same kind of value. So like log tooling, we leverage Datadog heavily. We do tracing, like all these kinds of things. Like how can we bring sort of the observability out of production such that people can troubleshoot without having to be in there? But then, service breaks in some way, shape, or form, someone's going to have to get into prod and do stuff. So I think it depends mostly on like enabling incident response and like the expedition of remediating impacts to your customers. And then also like, what are the things you need to do your job that could be obfuscated away is sort of how I think about that. So try not to give people as much hands-on access as like they ask for usually, but sometimes it's necessary.
That's a good answer. And for yourself, Josh, how do you think it Buyer's Edge platform?
Well, this is kind of an ongoing conversation for us. And, as how our infrastructure is designed has changed, we've had to kind of rethink how access has changed. A big kind of shift, the seismic shift for us has been in, moving towards containerization and Kubernetes. And we're getting much more restrictive about who and how we provide access. I think in the past, it wouldn't have been unusual for us to provide a lot of access, particularly to like team leads and things like that. Now, one of our big projects for this year is to have some sort of self-service developer dashboard, at least for the AWS scope of our infrastructure. And so we're currently debating on the best way to do that now.
Cool. Thanks, Josh. Sako?
Yeah, I will say when it comes to secret management, if we could track what are our key secrets and are we rotating them in a regularly basis, I think that's the key. Making sure developers in their laptops there is not left any secrets and so forth. These kind of things, Teleport helps a lot in that front. And but once we distribute that access, the key also is, are we have enough audit logs and are we are dealing with these audit logs? Let's say, what's a churn and the company policies around that, and are we complying with that? I think that's it.
So you're like a lot more focused on compliance, gladly, which can be different than Josh and Kevin.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think one thing we've seen since Teleport Connect was one particular sophisticated attack on directly targeted engineers, and Circle CI have a blog post how, and then someone got access to their system, and it looks like that engineers' second factor SSO backed session cookie was hijacked, and that was sort of their pivot and access mechanism, which if we kind of go back to you need Okta and SSO, like that doesn't necessarily solve all of your problems, and you need other places to check. And so is this something that's sort of top of mind for all of you? And if so, like what are you thinking about how to like solve this problem?
Yeah, I mean, we think about that quite frequently. We rolled out WebAuthn as our only MFA factor last year, and that's been actually pretty great. I talked about that a little bit in my talk earlier, but to be honest, I think it's made enforcing MFA easier. It's a lot easier. It's more accessible to people. You don't have to get your phone out and look at a code or wait for a text message. Use Touch ID or Face ID on your phone. All the machines we issue to people have biometric authenticators in them, so it's been really easy to support that, and that's been helpful. One of the things we do though is for like high priority applications, we will require an MFA like reprompt for every single sign-in. So we do that with Teleport. You need to SSH or TSH to a box. You got an MFA. You terminate that session, do it again. You got an MFA again. So the minor hurdle it's easy for most people to deal with, especially when you're used to it as an engineer. That does help with some of those attacks. It obviously doesn't solve everything. But there's also kind of a broader topic of like insider threat sort of expanding out beyond what the sort of traditional view of it is of like a malicious employee, and more broadly to not just malicious intent, but also employees who are being compromised in some way, shape, or form, be it malware on device or like bribery and extortion of employees has been a big thing the last couple of years. And so trying to think about how do we solve for this scenario where like a device is fully compromised, like a laptop, and whatever the attacker is doing is going to look exactly like an employee. So we do some interesting stuff there, especially with respect to actions taken on Discord platform. A little bit limited as to what we can do for like Okta and GitHubs of the world, since we don't control that. But WebAuthn been a huge benefit for us. It's made adherence to security policies easier. It has helped with some of those kinds of attacks. So I think that's been nice as well. And then to Josh's point, just observability everywhere and making sure that you're identifying, monitoring, and alerting on the right things dramatically reduces the time to respond to stuff, because you won't ever get rid of all of it. You're going to have to respond to some things.
Cool. Thanks, Kevin. What about yourself, Josh?
Well, I think adding or further automating our response to incidents is a big part of this puzzle for us. We have a lot of developers. We have a lot of individual devices to keep track of, and a relatively small team. So we try and punch above our weight if possible. For us, it's meant, ingesting a lot of log data that we wouldn't have ordinarily done, the investment that comes with that. And analyzing those logs properly and making sure we have some sort of remediation process available, based on that data.
Yeah, and how proactive are you looking at those logs? Are you sort of keeping up in like real time, or is it more if an incident happens, you use those for just sort of seeing what happened during that incident?
Well, we have dedicated security staff that track each and every incident. And in addition to that, we have a kind of a more remediation focused approach to not necessarily incidents, but more long-term remediation tasks, right?
Yeah.
So we have a different approach for both.
Okay, makes sense. And Sako, what about yourself? I know gladly you talk a lot about compliance. What's your thoughts on sort of these sophisticated facts on engineers and maybe from a compliance perspective?
Yeah, I will definitely join Kevin and Josh in terms of alerting and making sure even it's expected, let's say if they have access, getting notification in key infrastructure, let's say somebody's accessing production database, and making sure we go ask that person, hey, is it expected? Do you have any change request? and more process around that helps. Same time, more alerting could be in front of anomaly detection, and if you said, and whenever you see traffic going in and out, if you send it suspicious, things that you can go investigate, and having up-to-date playbook where incident response plan, and making sure the teams don't see security as something, more collaboration and education piece, I would say, for the teams. And not really having playbook there and expect team will do it, more having that kind of exercises and continuous education. And let's say when it comes to password and all these policies around it, just maybe going and talking to the team, like maybe they have some features they are working on, they didn't get enough time, and making sure the teams prioritize these educational piece, I think helps.
Yeah, I think they kind of tied well into like Kevin's keynote. I think at the Department of Yes, it's more like making sure that the engineers can do their job, but also keeping it the most secure as well. I think it's a good segue. So kind of going into, we talked a lot about attacks and infrastructure. This one's more of a sort of an individual in your role. And I know you three have sort of different roles and titles. And so I wonder if you could say like, what is your title and sort of what some of the biggest challenges you have and sort of how you overcome them in that role. So I guess Kevin is sort of an interesting, unique one, probably more security centric.
Sure. Yeah. I head of security engineering. So all of the security engineering folks for the entire company report to me. In this role specifically, I joined as the third employee a year and a half ago, and we're about 20 now in security. I hired just about all of them, so that's been a particular challenge, especially in light of like in the middle of last year when basically the entire industry was like, oh, the economy is not doing so well, we should halt everything, all spending and hiring, everything. I was affected by that. Then we immediately see all these layoffs, and so we come back into this and people are being hesitant about jumping to new jobs. My options are no longer kind of anybody I can attract to come to Discord, but people who are willing to take a leap of faith in the middle of an economically sort of questionable time period. So built-in team, hard. Also, it's kind of hard to explain this, but like Discord, the way we treat like organizations internally is like not quite like Spotify autonomous teams model in a way, but it's like cross-functional org. So there's a variety of security folks that don't report to me. And so how do I like build that team and get involved in interviewing and making sure we bring in the right people, but also coordinate across multiple different organizations with different leaders as to how we like accomplish some of the things we want to do. And it's been successful, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of talking to other people. It's a lot of, I've interviewed hundreds of engineers in the last couple of years. So I can kind of almost do it in my sleep, but that's probably the biggest challenge, outside of like very specific things within security at Discord for me.
Okay, great. What about yourself, Josh?
Well, staffing's been a challenge at times for us too, especially last year. But I think for me personally, just staying on top of an ever increasing pace of innovation has been challenging. I've been in enterprise IT for about 15 years now, and this has always been an industry that moves fast. But yeah, I think the shifts are more fundamental and they're getting more rapid. And the scope of knowledge that's required to fill a systems administration or a systems engineering position is wider than it was 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah. And so Josh, what is your title?
Senior systems engineer.
Systems engineer, yeah. So a more systems focused, probably why you have more. Yeah, definitely in the 15 years, it's been a wild change. And I think the one thing we see at Teleport too is like, we talked a lot about protocols, but everything is sort of now just like a HTTP API. And, you're just interacting with like APIs. So, you want to fire up AWS infrastructure. It's just like a HTTP API. And, it's sort of abstracting as far as traditional, what you would consider protocols or, let's say like MySQL or Postgres. Sako, do you want to just give your title and what's the sort of challenges that you face in your role?
Yeah, definitely. In a DevOps team, the key success is how we design as early scalable, reliable, secure infrastructure, and quite piece of open source also tooling we are using, and sometimes they are hosted by the Teleport, for example. It has own open source. They're good companies, but sometimes it's also individuals, and which comes with risk associated with that, and dealing with that and making sure we can predict some of these risks prior and be more proactive when bringing each tool, and meantime keeping innovation pace in that front. It's quite a bit of challenge, and especially is also when it comes to all these tooling security concerns around them, because they're doing different ways. There is not a standards around open source tools, I would say. Supply chain, basically.
Yeah, I think that brings me to my next question. It's a great segue. And I think that's sort of balancing innovation against security. Do you want to go, Sako, first? Talking about how you want to bring sort of innovation with open source software. How do you sort of balance the security aspects of it?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of going to experimenting, and not always the documentation is up to date. And if you are inside that community and going through, it helps in a way more have some this insight, helps when making that decision, innovating. Sometimes they're in early stage, it's like having a bet on some of these things while you are innovating, and over time it may prove you wrong or right. So it's challenge, but definitely the people behind and looking at their profile for security, how they handling it from day one, builds that trust.
Okay, great. And Josh, how do you think about sort of balancing innovation and security? I know you already touched on how much stuff has changed. So how do you sort of, I guess, embrace the innovation and then also sort of keep things secure?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, to some extent, I think I'm almost sort of a part of an adversarial system where, people on my team kind of push for the most secure solution possible, while, people in management kind of push back a little bit in terms of cost or what's feasible in terms of time. And we meet somewhere in the middle, and that's worked out pretty well so far. But yeah, I see that as part of a continuing process. I just keep pushing for more secure solutions and get away with as much as I can. And, our management is able to kind of balance the cost benefit.
Okay, and Kevin, for yourself, I know Discord's always innovating. How did you keep it in check?
I mean, it's we're a bit lucky in that we're surrounded by people that are constantly building new things and doing new stuff on the platform, and so we definitely get a dose of innovation all the time. On the flip side, it's a program is not that old. The security program is not that old, so we're doing all the boring stuff, roll out vulnerability management and get SSO going everywhere, that sort of thing. And so usually what I try to do is knowing that we have so many of these sort of boring or foundational bodies of work to do, I also then carve out some time to let's solve an interesting problem or a unique problem, such that people are on the team are at least still entertained or engaged with the work, because some of them have done this for a long time. This is the 4th or 5th time I'm rolling out vulnerability management. It is boring to me, although very important. So we try to do a little bit of that, and then where we can or where it makes sense, I'll embed folks on other teams. We rebuilt off for Discord last year, and actually our platform and services team owned that. But I sent a security engineer over there to say make sure they're doing it right, but also work on something that's very forward in the product, something that's sort of innovative. We're changing the way we're doing things. So mostly it's a manager thing for me. Make sure people are. What did Google used to do? 10% of your time can be spent on random stuff, or whatever that was. And so same sort of deal, spend some percentage of your time, everybody on the team, doing something that isn't the core project work that's on the roadmap, whatever, just to stay engaged, mix it up a little bit, etc.
Yeah, kind of that makes sense to try and hack weeks can always be good. Some kind of break, you're always deep in stuff, and always, it's when you first start working on something, you do it in the most insecure way possible, and then it's slowly secure it. So switching gears a little bit, like what do you see as some of the biggest trends or shifts that's going to happen in our industry this year? Kevin, you want to take this one first?
Sure. I think we're going to continue to see more ransomware. I also think we're going to continue to see more of like what Lapsus was doing last year, which is trying to target and disrupt companies in creative ways. I think Lapsus's main sort of threat vector was to go after outsourcers and try to gain access to something such that they can then do whatever else it is they do. I think we'll see a lot more of that. But as companies, I think are getting more on the the SSO everything, rolling out YubiKeys and WebAuthn and everything else, I think we'll probably start to see more of threat actors targeting employees directly, either bribery or extortion. Things like doxing and swatting, I think, are on the rise, and then we'll probably start having to deal with sort of the fallout from that, which is everyone's always had to worry about insider threat, but I think it's growing some different legs these days. Is my suspicion.
Yeah, and what do you see as some? I mean, I think that's kind of interesting. Is the connection between like people and software? There's obviously like software solution problems, but there's also like people solutions. How do you think you sort of balance the software solving this for the like education people part of it?
That's a hard question. I lean quite heavily into the psychology. Like we're working with other people, and so I think everyone's tried security training, everyone's tried security education, and I think there's value in that. But people tend to see it as a checkbox, right? They have 10 other trainings they have to do, anti-harassment training, and sign the employee handbook that they have to reread every year, and all those kinds of things. And so just piling on another training, I don't think is effective. So what we try to do internally is try to be very transparent about what we're working on, what we think is important for Discord. I have pretty regular discourse with the whole company about here's what I'm thinking about this week, and then just facilitate open conversations about some of these topics. And that's a different way to get the education out there. It's like, oh, I get a time to talk to the head of security. He spent some time answering my questions. That I think a lot of people think are dumb questions. In my opinion, they're all good questions, because if you can get an answer out of it you didn't know before, it's a good question. So I try to do that. So it's not so much like, here's a deck for 30 minutes you got to look at and then answer some questions, but rather have conversations with the security team. So change the way you do education, talk to people, make sure you're reachable, make sure you're approachable. Yes, all that stuff,
And Josh, what are you seeing as some of the biggest trends and shifts in your industry, considering it's a little different?
Well, Kevin, covered the gamut in a way, but one of the things I've been thinking a bit about more recently is manipulation of AI development tools by sort of poisoning research sets. I think we're looking at things like that to help support our developers, make their life a little bit easier. And I think there's going to be a lot of new and creative ways to really make those difficult to provision. One of the things we kind of read in the fine print of one of the tools was how sort of racial invective had sort of made its way into AI recommendations based on GitHub repository manipulation, for example. And there can be some pretty explosive consequences for that. So
yeah,
that's on my radar now.
A hot topic. And I think there's also a case of, it's almost like shadow IT to some degree. And I think some people have started to say ban ChatGPT because people put your source code in and see if it changes it, not realizing that your source code is also going into the training model as well, which has other implications for your business. Sako, what do you see as some of the biggest sort of trends or shifts in your industry this year?
One plus on the AI part, and I see both pros and cons. And I started even in daily tasks trying to use it, and one of the sources, I think it's really specific. If you ask a question, it gives you a nice specific solution, which is not still mature enough, but I think it's getting there, and I expect to see more tooling around that. You empowered using AI, and same time concerned about if some people have these adverse serial like intention that how bad it can go. I think it's both sides, and more having also legal side and policies around that. I think it's still new, fairly new, and how to deal with that.
Okay, great. I know we have 9 minutes left. I have a few more questions. If anyone has a Q&A, I know there's a few people. We'll look through that in a bit. But I'm going to go for a softball one for everybody. I know there's some students on today, people various degrees of their career. What are sort of some tips that you give for people who are looking to pursue a similar career path as yourselves? You want to take it, Kevin?
Yeah, sure. Geez, this is a good one. I think that the most important thing about going into the security space is being able to think or have that sort of adversarial mindset. And then there's a variety of backgrounds and sort of kinds of expertise that you can have and apply through that mindset that will make you useful. Like, I didn't come up in security. I started in customer service, and then I ran incident management teams for a long time, and then sort of accidentally got into security, where I very much enjoyed myself. But like think like an adversary, but also understand the incident response and like quick remediation and containment and all those kinds of things. And so been able to apply that very successfully in my career. I've hired SREs. I've hired software developers with no security background. I've hired people out of IT. So it kind of just depends on, I think, what you want to do, like what part of security is interesting to you, if we're talking about security specifically. And then think about like where you want to go. Like, I, for the most part, hire software developers on my team to do security things. That's not the case everywhere. Like a security engineer has a very broad definition. That's not the same as a software engineer. You don't have to be a developer to have success in the security space. But it's hard work, so you need to be okay with ambiguously defined things and lots of hair on fire all the time. So if you're okay with those kinds of things and can think like an adversary and then understand how you would stop an adversary from doing things, that's how you can get into the security space. There's a huge staffing problem. We need way more women. We need way more people who don't look like me in security. So like anybody and everybody that doesn't look like me, like, please go do security stuff.
Thank you, Kevin. And Josh, what would be your sort of career tips for people looking to become a systems engineer?
Oh, it's a great question. I think it's probably changed quite a bit from when I was getting started. But in many ways, I think it hasn't either. What was a benefit to me was just getting started doing anything with computers, just unprofessionally. But, installing Linux, getting a web server working, writing an application, building a database, populating that database with information, try and solve some problems with code. Break your server or fix it. That sort of experience is going to be beneficial to you no matter what space you go to work in IT. And for security specifically, Kevin mentioned there's a certain mindset. And I just add to the sort of attributes he listed, a sort of intellectual curiosity too, because there's a lot of reading and learning necessary to keep up to breast on the latest exploits, latest threats, on top of the responsibility of learning the more basic information of how systems work.
Yeah, definitely. You always have to be learning. The only constant is change. And Sako, what about yourself? What's your career tips and advice?
Yeah, definitely. I can give one example from while I was in the school. We had this small little class project, but we were able to take one project and start it as open source, and every time just go add on top of that. Like one project in 2 years, we just worked on that. That was really hands-on, that experience, and collaboration was key. Not just doing yourself and working with other, it could be your classmates or it could be somebody from outside who can be mentoring you, and just going and asking that more specific questions. I think it will help. That way you will push all the cylinders and identify what you are more excited, and you can deep on that. And other than that, not trying to learn too much, but more focused on first concept that will help you give a good base where you can just go apply them, and whatever comes, you can pick it faster. Like developing the approach to learn, I think would help.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so we have 4 more minutes left. I see there's 2 questions. I think, Chris, I'll probably just follow up in an email for you, but I think Ben has a great question. I don't know if we'll get to this completely. I think someone might have answered already, but he asked, what kind of KPIs do you send over to the management or C-suite to show you how well you're executing? Did you answer that one, Kevin?
Yeah, I actually did answer the question. So that answer is mine, but I'll regurgitate it here. The answer kind of depends. Again, all sorts of it depends answers, but I send a variety of things. Your standard metrics like mean time to detect and respond, vulnerability SLAs, critical high, whatever. But I think it's less about the metrics and more about like what the story you're trying to paint is for management. So one of the things that my C-suite wants to see is like on a per domain basis, in IT, in engineering, in wherever, and then break that down in engineering. What does our risk exposure look like? So as an example, we give vulnerability density as a metric for engineering, and it's basically number of vulns per line of code. It's kind of a rough proxy for like how many vulnerabilities are in your code that isn't just like, oh, here's 3,000 things that Dependabot found. And that one's been interesting because we're looking at breaking up by director within engineering, so they can see like, oh, well, this part of the organization generates more vulnerabilities, or this part of the organization is not as good at remediating them within SLA. And so the idea there being like, I want to show like this is where we are today, but these are also the areas for improvement. So highlight things like, oh, yeah, well, that org is always out of SLA. What do we need to do to change that?
I think it's kind of interesting too. You can almost like, I guess, gamify it. There's probably some orgs which once you see it, you can start making it go down, which I guess has like pros and cons too.
That's the plan eventually. We actually rolled out a SAST check, random SAST check last year that said a wild SAST check has appeared, and like it was like basically word for word like the Pokemon thing. And that was actually very, very well received by devs. They thought it was clever and entertaining, and so they'd get an alert and be like, I will fix that bug. And I'm like, wow, that worked. So yeah, definitely going to gamify more of it.
Yeah. Well, I know we only have like 1 minute left, and I think Goldcast might cut us off. So I'm going to just take this time to thank our guests for coming today. Kevin, Josh, Sako. We have 2 minutes if you want to say any last closing thoughts.
Just thanks for inviting. Had a great time. Teleport Connect has been great. San Francisco was fantastic. I hope we do it again next year. And just thanks so much for inviting us.
Cool. Thank you, Josh. Yeah. Sako, any last thoughts?
Yeah, one plus what Josh said. It was great to meet team in person, and lovely product, lovely team. That's what you need as customers like us, and appreciate. Keep doing what you're doing, and looking forward to see more this year.
Thank you. And Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a pleasure working with Teleport. Teleport Connect last year was really great. We'll definitely be at the next one. Last passing words of advice, I guess, roll out WebAuthn everywhere. It'll save a lot of pain.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to leave the stage now. I think in 43 seconds, everyone will probably go to the next session. I think speakers, you can press it and we'll go backstage.
Thank you.
Okay.